All right, now on to karma. If I middle mouse, we have density, velocity, and flame. How do we take that and make it look good? Well, what I'll be doing is rather than reassigning materials for the environment and trying to make that work with karma, I'm going to render this scene with Redshift, and then I'm going to composite the explosion on top of this. So that is the task. That's the challenge here. And if you were at a studio, this would be exactly the kind of thing that you would run into. Maybe you would have a rendered scene. Maybe this would be some kind of live plate that you would need to put an explosion into. And so this would kind of mimic that situation. Okay, well, we have our fields. We have a couple of lights. Let's go to the stage and use the scene import here to select what we want. So in the objects, I'll just go for the 2 karma lights and the large plume build. Accept the pattern, and we end up with this. Now, right away, this is going to be kind of messed up here. We have this weird artifact happening where it just doesn't look good. The materials aren't coming in right. We do have this thing called a pyro shader going on. So let's see what that's all about. Pause the render. Go back to the object level. So this pyro shader, if we follow that, is landing right here. And for whatever reason, it doesn't work well if you try to bring in a material for a pyro sim. It doesn't know what to do with the pyro shader. It kind of freaks out if you don't have the right fields or whatever it is. I'm not sure. But what you need to do is get rid of this in the regular material context. Go to the object level, get rid of this material assignment right there. And then when you go to the stage, we will set our own brand new material inside of USD. I found all kinds of issues with the materials here in USD. So it's better to just make it here, and that seems to avoid some of these issues. Let's create a pyro shader, and we will name this our pyro shader, like so. And if we go back here to the material library and we say autofill materials, nothing's going to happen. And this is probably a bug. It's some sort of missing feature, I'm not sure. But what you have to do is press the X right here and get rid of all materials, and then try to autofill one more time. And then for some reason, it picks it up. So we now have the pyro shader happening. To assign that material, / large plume build, and we need to grab volume 0. So now that we have that, let's try restarting karma, and there we go. Just to see that this is working, let's change the smoke color to red, and sure enough, that works just fine. So we know that this is being assigned. Okay, so that is my recommendation for assigning materials. Now, where do we go from here? What's the first thing you want to do when you have a simulation and you want to get started with shading? The first thing that you want to do is you want to go to your data, the density, velocity, and flame, and normalize pretty much everything except for velocity. So let's create a volume slice and sample density to get us started. There we go, density. It's making this attribute called density. Now we can use an attribute promotes to figure out how high that value is going. So let's take density. Originally, that is a point going to a detail, and the promotion method is going to be maximum. So now the maximum value is about 50. So with that information, we will create a volume wrangle, and what we'll say is that density is equal to the fit function, and we are fitting the density value, which used to be between 0 and 60, to 0 and 1. Let's copy this, do the same exact thing for flame. So now we have flame and we have flame. Let's see what those flame values are. Get rid of that, call it flame, And once we do this, our maximum flame value is 0.31 at frame 39. If we go back to, let's say, frame 35, that's going to be higher. So let's say that flame is probably about 0.4, 0.5, something like that. This needs to be just generally normalized. It doesn't have to be perfectly normalized, just so that these values are about 0 to 1. Again, the reason why we're doing that is so that we have better control over the shader settings. I'll rename this the fit volume vals right there. And one other thing that I like to do just to keep this clean is to clean everything except for the name. And if we do that, there we go. We just have everything removed except for our fields. I just like doing that out of keeping things clean and organized. So we're going to do just that. Okay, let's go to our scene view now and see what we have when we switch back over to the stage and render this with Karma. What you'll notice is that this is all messed up. And if we go to our object level and we go to our large plume build, we do in fact have the visibility on density, velocity, and flame. So what gives? Why are we seeing that? Well, one quirk of USD and Houdini and just this whole system is that you have to update and re-import everything every single time you make a change in the object level. So that means we go to our scene import, bypass it, and then turn it back on. That re-imports everything, and now when we restart the render, we have our velocity fields and our density and our flame all back. So that's just a quirk that you have to know about Karma. That might become a big annoyance if you have big scenes that need to be reloaded over and over and over again. So it is advised to take care of all of your object level stuff ahead of time and then save the Karma USD stuff for the very end. Okay, so now that we have those values normalized, let's take up our density. We'll say that this is going to be multiplied times 40. And if we do 40, we end up with this. For right now, I'm going to make general settings for everything. All of these settings are going to be refined. So the idea when you're shading is that you want to give a general pass over everything and then go back and dial things in. None of these settings are going to be really final until the very end. So just don't get attached to anything right away. With the shadow density, let's set this to about 0.5. With the smoke color, I'm going to turn it into a bit more of a reddish color right here. Take the saturation in half and probably a little bit more red. If we take a look at our reference, this is the dirt that we're trying to mimic. So by the looks of that, we need to get more saturated, and that looks a lot better right about there. I'm just going to eyeball that for the time being. These colors might change because I haven't taught you guys how to bring in aces and proper color management for this yet, which we will do in a future video. So for right now, we want just something in general, and that's fine. The shadow color, that's set to white by default. If you turn that black, we don't have any shadows. So it's kind of ironic. And then if you did the pyro bake volume, that would be actually opposite. But in this case, with the shader, this is actually correct, even though the shadow color is not really white. So anyway, don't let that confuse you. The absorption color, I like to set this to basically the same thing we have here. Copy parameter, paste relative references. And then we can just delete these channels real quick. Except I like taking the absorption to something that's a lot less saturated. So something right around there. And then I like to move it more towards the yellows a little bit. So something right about there is pretty good. Okay, now the scattering phase. If we hover over this, what we'll see is that the default of 0 light scatters evenly in all directions. If we have positive values, they scatter more and more in the same direction as the incoming light. So think of it as light hits the smoke and it bounces off of that smoke, which is what would happen if you had kind of rocky particulates and debris. And so if we turn this up by, let's say, 0.35, you'll notice that we get a way more pronounced rim effect. And I really like that. And so that also mimics what we would see in actual smoke. If this was a more water refractive based smoke, then it would go in the negative direction where light is going through it. So for pyro, you pretty much always want your scattering phase to be positive. And that also just aesthetically looks nice because it adds more of that rim effect. Okay, so that does it for the smoke as far as a general setting goes. Let's now go to our fire, enable that. And we'll need to change the bindings on fire so that we have flame. And if we have flame there and flame here, we now have fire. So if you saw what we did with redshift, the idea here is that we don't want any high values where the flame gets really, really hot, and we want to kind of cut it off where it's really cold so that we have more density lying on top of everything. So now, if I restart this render, we end up with this, which is kind of what we had originally with the redshift stuff that I was showing you earlier. So that's pretty good. The source range again was normalized before, so we don't need to adjust this. What we could do is go down to the fire color ramp. And this again is likely to change when we add aces. However, what I generally like to do for these colors is to set this to white, get rid of that guy, set this to a yellow, kind of bring it a little bit towards the red, and then desaturate it a fair bit, so right around there. And then towards the bottom here, let's go red, saturate that a lot more, and in the middle, we can try for more of a orangey color. So something probably right around there. It's not an exact science here, but that is generally going to give us a fairly realistic look on our flame. What I also like doing is I like lining up these ticks right here with each other. So let's do something right about there, and we'll have our whites line up with the very high areas of our ramp so that we end up with mostly kind of an orange look, but it then quickly goes to white, like so. Let's go ahead and refresh this. And also sets the mode down here to auto update. All right, and that will give us this. Right now, all of these values are clipping very badly, and that's what happens when you're not using aces. So in the next video, let's talk about how to integrate aces so that we can really dial in these colors, and we'll take it from there.